Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Jeanette, and I am an educator here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. I'm going to guide you through the wonderful world of rays today. However, I am not on my own in our studio today. I actually have my friend Sonia and Cole, and they'll be venturing a lot of the magic behind me on the screen. So a lot of all of the media, all the pictures, really cool, interesting videos and pictures that we're going to take a look at, including one of the ones that I'm going to be talking about right behind me. Before we get started, like I mentioned, you are joining me today. I am live from our studio at Long Beach at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Southern California. If you are currently watching us live at 3 p.m. on September 4th afternoon, you are more than welcome to join us with any questions or observations I might be asking from you at the number below. So you're more than welcome to text us live at 562-286-1838. However, if you are not watching us live again at 3 p.m. on September 4th afternoon, do not worry because we actually have staff that will be answering your emails or if any questions or later observations you might be seeing at a later time. Again, if you're not watching us live, you can also email us any questions at live@lbaop.org. All right, everyone. So, like I mentioned earlier, today we're going to be talking about the wonderful world of rays. Okay, so before we get started, we're going to take a closer look as an overview. We're going to take a closer look at a few rays. We're going to talk a little bit about their adaptations. And we're also going to be taking a closer look at a few species that we're going to highlight in today's discussion. All right. So before we even take a look at any specific rays, I know you might be seeing a lot of movement behind me as well. What we're looking at right now is actually a live cam of our very own shark lagoon. That is a habitat we have here at the Long Beach Aquarium of the Pacific. So you can watch this live at a later time if you would like. If you're wondering what some of our critters are up to, you can always join us at livecams.explore.org or even on YouTube. You can look up live cams directly from the Aquarium of the Pacific, and you'll get to see a lot of what we have behind me. So, in Shark Lagoon, like you might see from here from the name, we're going to be seeing a lot of sharks behind me. But you might be able to, if I step out of the screen for a second, you might be able to see other kind of observations. So before we even take a look at any specific rays, I want us to warm up our scientist brains. So as scientists, we're going to take a closer look and we're going to be making observations with our eyes. So using our senses of sight. An observation could be maybe a pattern. It could be a color. It could be maybe you're identifying some of the critters that are behind me. Maybe just some plants that you might be able to see, some other living things. Okay, so I'm going to step off the screen just for a few seconds. But I want you to start thinking about what are some observations you are making, right? Maybe you're seeing some specific colors, some specific shapes. Maybe you're noticing something about the habitat on its own. Or if you're already able to identify any of the animals that we have in our very own Shark Lagoon habitat, again, I invite you to text any observations if you're watching us live at that number below. It could also be a behavior, a movement. Ooh, a very good close-up right there. All right. So again, taking a closer look, any observations using our sense of sight. I'll give you a few more seconds. All right. So now that we've had a little bit of time to make some of our very own observations, maybe you already shared them with someone close by to you. Maybe you just told them on your own, right? But if you're able to take a closer look at our very own Shark Lagoon, you might be noticing some really big fish. I have one right behind me. We also got a really cool close-up of one that wanted to show off its really fancy fins, right? So we have a variety of sharks here in our Shark Lagoon. We have some blacktip reef sharks, like the ones that you got a really good close-up here. We have some gray reef sharks as well, like the one passing right behind me, right? A lot of living things. We also have all different kinds of fish that you might be able to find, like some unicorn fish, the ones with a really cool horn that they have right on top. But other than that, if you caught it a little bit sooner, maybe before I even stepped off the screen, you might have noticed something kind of hanging out at the bottom of the ocean floor, right? So if we take a closer look at the bottom of the ocean floor, you might be able to see some really cool critters like our rays, right? For our rays specifically, the reason we have them along with Shark Lagoon, one is because they are very closely related to sharks. We actually like to call them here at the aquarium kind of like cousins or relatives to the sharks and the shark family because they have a lot of similar adaptations or similar things that they have in their inside and outside of their bodies that they share in common. Another thing that you might have noted, right, is that we have some kind of colorful structures right at the middle of our shark lagoon, right? Like these right here. And they're very, very, very colorful. In fact, our shark lagoon had a really good revamp of this coral habitat that we call here, right? So I've used the word habitat a lot today. So if we think about a habitat, you also think about a home for these animals, right? Somewhere they could find their food, they could find other resources, somewhere where they have really good conditions specifically for their survival. So in this aspect, we have a coral reef habitat. So right here, we have really great models of corals. We have different shapes. We have some flat corals. We have some spikier corals, some round corals as well. And the fact that they are very colorful as well. At the bottom of these corals, we also have a lot of sediments, right? And then above all of that sediment, we have these really, really warm oceans. And that's what makes our coral reefs. So, if we think about our coral habitats, we know we have some sharks, we know we have some fish, right? And today we're going to be focusing on taking a closer look at another kind of inhabitant of these coral reefs, like our rays. So let's see. I know we don't have any rays up behind me. Maybe they're hanging out at more of the corners or somewhere where we can't see them. But the really cool part of our discussion today is we have some really cool images of rays. So let's see if we can find a really cool image of any ray so we can take a closer look. And once we have it up, we're actually going to be making more observations. So thinking about how we made observations of our very own shark lagoon, right? We noticed maybe some patterns, some colors, some behaviors, right? Or some specific things on their bodies that help them survive and live every day. We're going to do the same thing, but now we're going to take a closer look of a ray picture. All right, and this is a really, really awesome ray that we have behind me. I believe this is a bat ray. Is it bat ray? Yes. All right, I got it. So we have a bat ray picture right behind me. So in a second, I'm going to step off the screen for a few seconds again, and I want you to know any observations, right? What are some structures they have? What are some patterns they might have? Maybe they have some specific colors, right? Maybe they do a good job at blending in, or maybe they pop out right at you. You can also take a look at where it lives. Okay, so I'm going to step off the screen just for a little bit. But again, I want you to focus on our bat ray image here. It looks like our bat ray is living in more of a kelpie or kelp forest habitat. We have lots of plants and living things at the bottom. We can kind of see an overview of kelp pieces as well. That gave me a hint. I also know that bat rays like to hang out in kelp forests because we have a lot of bat rays in our very own kelp forest habitat here at our aquarium called Blue Cavern as well. So again, take a closer look. Is there a specific shape that ray is? Maybe it's a specific structure or different parts of the body that you can already see that they share very much in common to our very own bodies. Also focus on the color, right? So we kind of see this grayish tone color, and that's a lot of our rays are. So I'm going to step back onto the screen so we can talk about that a little bit. So one thing I noticed is this sort of grayish color on the top of their bodies, right? If we focus on that grayish color, if we were to ever look at a ray, let's say this specific bat ray, on the underside of it, like its belly area, right, you would not see that gray color. You would, in fact, see a more white shade of color. So this is for a specific reason of camouflage, right? So this specific camouflage is actually called counter shading, where depending on the perspective that you're seeing that ray, it's able to blend in. So if you think about the kelp forest or the surroundings of these bat rays, they have a lot of neutral or natural earth tones. For example, like more greens, browns, right? Darker grayish colors, grayer tone like rocks. So if you're looking at, let's say, our ray is right under us and we're looking down at it, you'll see the grayish back to that ray. So it's going to blend in with a lot of that sediment or just those leaves at the bottom. However, if you maybe our ray is above us and we're taking a swim, it's above us, and we go ahead and take a look up, we're going to see that bright white belly. And that will blend in with all of that sunlight piercing through the ocean floor in the kelp forest. And again, that is a type of camouflage tactic. Another thing you might have also observed is they're very, very flat bodies, right? So if you take a closer look at those flat bodies, kind of like laid out and stretched out horizontally, right? Kind of like a formation of maybe a pancake, right? So if we think about their flat bodies, that helps them kind of navigate through that ocean floor, right? And if we think about where these rays like to hang out, for the most part, they're hanging out very close to the bottom of the ocean floors. That is because they have a lot of their food source in that place, specific place of the ocean, right? Another thing you might notice is their eyes. They have very, very similar eye structures to us, where they have both of their eyes maybe on both sides of, or opposite side of their face, right? And we also notice kind of like this hole right here, right? That is what we call their spiracles. And that is so they can have a lot of that water coming into their bodies that helps them breathe. So they're not breathing like us, where we're taking deep breaths of air. They're actually grabbing their oxygen from all of that water flowing into their gills. So that spiracle is able to navigate all of that water and push it through their gills so they can take a deep breath and get all of that oxygen from the ocean water, right? Another part you might have noticed, it's right behind me. Let's see if I can point to it right here. There we go. Right? That kind of long projection coming towards the back of their bodies. That is their tail, right? And sometimes they have little tiny fins in that that helps them navigate through the ocean floor as well. So, one of the things that might help us kind of talk about the shapes or the body shapes of these rays, right? Is I have my little paper mache model here, right? But if I turn it this, you'll be able to see it's very elongated and it's very horizontal, right? Stretched out kind of very much like the pancake comparison I shared earlier, right? So this kind of flattened body shape is what we call a depressed body, right? So it's not going to be round if we look at it head on, right? It's not going to be stretched out vertically. It's going to be very horizontal. And it's going to be very much a depressed body because they're spending a lot of time on that sea floor. So if they were on the sea floor and they were, let's say, puffy like a puffer fish, they'll poke out very, very well, and other predators might be able to spot it right away. But since they're nice and flat like a pancake, they're able to kind of hide their way. If they have natural sediment like sand at the bottom of the ocean floor, they're able to kind of shimmy their way under that sand, and that gives them a really amazing hiding place. So their body shape is what we call an adaptation, right? If we think about the word adaptation, our own bodies have their natural adaptations that help us live and survive every single day. For example, we have fingers. There we go, right? We also have our brains that help us make every decision we make. We have our hearts that keep our body, our blood pumping all the way through our body, bringing all of those nutrients everywhere in our body as well. So just like how we have specific structures inside and outside of our bodies that help us live and survive every day, our rays have those same things. For example, like the flattened body that we talked about, or depressed body that we talked about, that gives them the ability to kind of hide from predators under that sediment, right? Another thing, adaptation that rays also have is their elongated fins. So if we're thinking about having those fins, or maybe we can see a video of these kind of rays swimming around and hanging out on the ocean floor. I also have my model, our very good model here of our ray as well, right? They kind of have these floppy sides over here, right? And they're not going to go ahead and, let's say, be swimming like us, where we're going to be paddling and paddling and paddling, right? Instead, you might be able to take a closer look at how these pectoral fins kind of sway around the ocean floor, just like this, right? So giving them enough of a push to navigate themselves and push themselves through that lots and lots of water, but it's also going to give them the ability to kind of stretch out as well, just like this. So I'm going to step out of the way so we can get this really cool video. There we go, right? We have a really cool video of those kind of pectoral fins on those sides. And we can take a look that they're very different than a fin of, let's say, a shark that we saw earlier, right? Because these are more, let's say, fused to the center of their body. So kind of like stuck to the side of them, and they stretch out really, really well all the way down towards the body, which gives them the ability to have these very, very strong swims as well. Kind of looks like it's, to me, it kind of looks like it's flying in within the ocean as well. So they have these really strong pectoral fins that they use to navigate through the ocean floor, right? One thing that you can also take a closer look at, and this video does a really good job at, is that sort of like long tail that we see here, right? But hidden within this tail, you might be thinking about, that is where we can find their stinger as well, right? If you ever heard about rays, you might have heard about our special ray called our stingrays group, right? So for our stingrays, not all rays have stingers, right? But for the most part, they're using it for defense. So they're not going to be on offense, where they're just going to be, let's say, using it to catch any sort of prey that they might find, but they're using it more as a defense for any predator, right, that might be going after them. So very defensive mode, right? So if we think about our stingrays on their own, let's see if we can take a closer look at what these barbs look like. So if we step onto my dog cam here, we're going to be able to see kind of this barb that we can find right at the tail, right? And it's not only hanging out just like that, but whenever it feels like it's in danger or it needs a sort of a defense to any predator, any sort of thing that it might find dangerous, right, or maybe uncertain of, it's going to go ahead and stretch this barb out from under its tail, right? And if we, let's see if we can zoom in a little bit more. I wanted you guys to get the full picture of this. But if we can zoom in to really see those sort of serrations that these barbs have. Let's see how much I could zoom in here. I think that should be fine right there, right? But we can see kind of like these hooks all the way along. If I could use my other finger, but all the way along the edges right here. Kind of and very much like a serrated knife, right? So if we think about maybe like a serrated knife or a chainsaw, when this is inserted to any sort of predator that might be, any potential danger, or that the ray sees as a potential danger, right? Let's see this the skin right here. It's going to go ahead and cling itself very, very well to that surface, right? And it's going to be very painful to come right out, right? So it's going to be very painful for whoever is being inserted into as well. So this is a way only for them to protect themselves. So if we think about maybe a stingray, right? One of the things that, if you've ever been swimming, one of the things that they might warn you about is potential stingrays being out in the ocean, right? Especially if you're right close to that sediment or the bottom of the ocean floor. In fact, one of the things that they advise you to do is to do a little bit of a stingray shuffle, right? So again, since those rays or those stingrays are only doing it for as a defense, right? There's no reason for them to do it just out of the blue. Unless you're kind of just hanging out and walking on that ocean floor, right? And then you kind of hang out or you pass by where these rays are hanging out, you might stumble upon a few of them. And if you maybe step on them accidentally, they might see it as a potential danger, right? So in case of to get rid of those kind of rays hanging out and you don't accidentally step one and get poked by one of these barbs, right? They advise you to do a little bit of a stingray shuffle, kind of shuffle your feet at the bottom of the ocean floor and making sure you're not stepping accidentally on those stingrays. All right, my friends. So we learned a little bit about their adaptations. Let's see if we could go back to that original picture that we took a look at of our bat ray so we can take a closer look at maybe other adaptations as well. So one of the things that I want to point out once we get back to that picture is I want you to focus it on its front area, right? You might think about it like as our nose for us, right? It's kind of coming out of our bodies like this, right? But if you take a closer look, it seems I don't see a mouth on here. Do you guys see a mouth? I wonder if we can see the mouth, or where do you think the mouth is? Because if we ever take a look at the bottom of a ray, you might take a closer look at its mouth. And in it, you might find, especially specific for this kind of ray, you might find its mouth. So we're going to step onto our dock cam here real quick. And we're going to be taking a closer look at the jaw of a bat ray, exactly like the one we saw pictured right there. Let me zoom all the way out. We had to take a really great zoom in here of the barbs but don't worry because we can zoom out and we're going to get a really cool image of this jaw of a bat ray. So when we take a closer look at teeth, teeth oftentimes give us a good hint of what this animal might be eating, right? For example, in our own teeth, you're able to take a look at, let's say I take a nice big bite of an apple, right? I'm going to take a look, I'm going to be biting that apple with my pointy incisors here. So I'm going to take that first initial bite with these pointy incisors because they're nice and sharp. So they're really good at taking bites, right? However, once I start to chew my apple, I'm going to send it to the back where I have my flat molars. So let's see what we take a look here. So if we look at the teeth right here, they oftentimes, I always like to ask people what it reminds them of, right? I've gotten lots of different answers. For example, maybe it reminds them of a snake skin, right? It can also, I've also gotten that it reminds them of maybe like a tire print or tire mark, right? But these are its teeth, right? If we look at it from this perspective here, they're nice and flat. They don't come out or project as much. They're not pointy, as you can see. I can go ahead and rub my finger on them, and it's not going to hurt. So what do you think they're eating? Do you think they're eating something that they have to take nice big bites of? Or do you think that they're nice and flat, right? Kind of like if you take your knuckles and go like this, and you're going to go ahead and squish the food, kind of like our molars do for us as well. Well, they are mostly eating things with crunchy shells. So having teeth that are nice and flat and stretched out like this gives them the ability to kind of break food down, just like, again, if you put your knuckles just like that, kind of grinding that food just like that. And they're able to eat things at the bottom of the ocean floors like little tiny crustaceans, probably not as big as this, right? But things with harder shells or surfaces that gives them the ability to crunch all of these little tiny things up. That is why if you ever visit us here where we have our rays in Shark Lagoon, right, you might be able to see lots of little tiny shells kind of cut up and grinded up by these teeth and just along the ocean floor. All right. So we've taken a closer look at their teeth. We kind of learned a little bit about their stingers, their fins, right, their flattened bodies. Now what we're going to take a look at is we're going to try to sneak in at least one species here. Let's see if we can focus on maybe the manta ray. Since we're already talking about eating, right? Let's see if you can guess what this one eats. So if you think about our manta rays are really, really, really large animals. In fact, they can grow up to 20 feet across. So again, thinking about our stingrays and their pectoral fins and stretching out just like this, right? They can stretch out their fins to be 20 feet across from fin to fin, right? And if we take a closer look, this is actually a really good image to point out those kind of fins as well. Let's see if I could point them out here. Right here, right? They have kind of like these staggered lines, and those are their gills. My bad, I think I said fins earlier, but they are their gills, right? So again, like we talked about earlier, those spiracles drive that water to their gills. Those are the gills, and you're able to see them really well on the underside of this ray here, specifically this manta ray, right? And I believe we also have a video of a manta ray eating, right? Because thinking about where they're found, it gives us the ability to make a prediction on where they are or what they are eating, right? For manta rays, since they are very large animals, they're going to be stretched out really, really, really wide. They're going to be living mostly on the open ocean, which we call more of a pelagic creature, right? Since they're looking for their food source, and there's a lot of their food source at the open ocean. And what they're mostly eating is plankton. So they're known as we call planktivores. So they're kind of just moving on the ocean floor. They don't have those flat teeth. They're kind of just taking in all of those gulps of water, and they're kind of just keeping all of that plankton inside of their mouth, and that's what they're eating. So plankton are very, very tiny, so they don't really need really large pointy teeth or flat teeth like the ones we saw earlier, because they're not really crunching up shells. They're just kind of opening up their jaws really, really wide, right? Taking that nice big gulp of water, and they're kind of just filtering out all of that water and keeping all of that good, yummy plankton inside of their bodies. All right, my friends. Look at that ray getting all of that plankton in that nice big open ocean right there. All right, my friends. So now that we sneaked in a little bit of our manta ray here, we're going to start talking a little bit about conservation. Because why does this really matter? We now learned a lot about our rays. We learned about what makes a ray, right? We learned a little bit about adaptations of our rays, but why does this matter? Well, if we think about ray conservation, 5 out of 7 families of our ray group are actually threatened. So that means that we have to focus a lot of our conservation efforts into doing what we can do to save them at the level that they are at already, right? One thing that you're already doing is raising awareness. So by joining us today and learning a little bit about our rays, you're already educating yourself, and maybe you have the ability to even educate others around you. Because we can't really defend or we can't really protect what we don't know about. So just by you joining us today, or maybe just educating others, maybe you're just sharing information with others, that already gives you the ability to share that information, right? And that'll be really, really well as you guys grow up, because you guys are the future of our conservation efforts as well. So if we're focusing on that ray conservation and sharing all of that awareness, that'll be a good way of starting already. All right, my friends, as we kind of wrap up here, let's think about what we already talked about on the wonderful world of rays. So we learned all about rays. We learned a little bit about ray adaptations, right? For example, we learned about their flattened bodies. We learned about their fins, their stingers, right? We talked a little bit about their gills and how they filter that water, right? We take a closer look at their jaws because they give us really good clues on what they eat, right? We focused a little bit and took a closer look on the species of manta rays, and we learned a little bit about what they like to eat, right? We're thinking about bat rays earlier. They like to eat more crunchy things by grinding them with their flattened teeth. But we also have, on the other hand, the lovely view of that manta ray behind me, taking big gulps and filtering all of that plankton out of that open ocean, right? And we also talked a little bit about ray conservation. All right, my friends, it was very lovely to have you today joining us at another Aquarium Online Academy. Do not worry, because we have these weekly, so you'll be free to join us next week on Tuesday at 10 and 11 as well. All right, my friends, I will see you next time, and don't forget to continue exploring. Bye, everyone.